There's a lot that goes into city as well.
All right, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the City Council Conference for July 9th, 2019. We have 2 items on the agenda, and tonight we're going to start with Jeannie Schneider for a discussion regarding amending the accessible parking fines to comply with current state law.
Okay, well, good afternoon or almost evening, everybody. And this was presented originally to the oversight in June 6th about the accessible parking ordinance, which includes increasing the fines to $500 and a few other items. And so we brought forward the proposed ordinances tonight. And I did not prepare a PowerPoint. I'm just going to go through them with you. It's a really pretty easy one. First off, in section 14.311C, we're going to change the term from handicap to accessible. And after I've had some conversations with Jack, I understand better about the terminology that should be used. Parking spaces are accessible; they're not disabled or handicapped. So I'm glad to get those distinctions changed. That's also going to change in the authority to impound and under the city manager, where we're replacing the word handicapped with accessible. We're going to delete the section that's currently discusses our handicap parking spaces in section 2807.8, and it will be replaced with a new section 20-817. And as I was reading through some of these, I found in one of in 20-807, DeBar Avenue was mentioned, and so I'm going to go ahead and make that change to Dean's Row. And there may be some others throughout the ordinance that I maybe ought to look through, but that just kind of a little item on that. And then the new parking ordinance, the new accessible parking space ordinance, it pretty much mirrors state law. They do still use, state law still uses the word disabled, and we're going to change that as we need it for accessible. But just real quickly, it's unlawful to park in any parking space that's designated for accessible parking unless you have a state-issued placard or a plate. There's a number of different types of license plates you can have. And it must be displayed. It will be unlawful to park even if you have a placard or not, or a plate or not, in any, and there I will use the word disabled again, parking space, access aisle, wheelchair ramp, or wheelchair unloading or loading area. So regardless if you have a placard or not, you will not be allowed to park in those areas. It will also be unlawful for any person to use somebody else's placard or plate knowingly. That's not been issued to them. I know our parking service officers have come across situations to where, like, your grandparent might have one, and then you're in their car and it's hanging in there and they're not with you. You can't use that placard to park in a parking space unless the person is with you.
And so my clarification for that is the placard is with the person, not necessarily the vehicle. So if you're in your description, if the grandparents were with you and you had it in your car, it would still be fine.
That's a good question, Mayor. I'm not sure if it's issued by person or car. We do have the system that our parking service officers.
It's issued by the doctor to the person.
To the person.
Thank you.
Because I think in the past we had believed it was the car, but it is the person.
Councilmember Wilson.
How do we enforce that part? That seems difficult to enforce.
Well, it's like if they come, if they see the person or talk to the person, from my understanding, and ask them, if somebody gets a citation and they come in and tell us that, we may find out that way. I'm not sure how the parking service officers do that. They don't approach people and say, hey, you don't look like you need to.
That would be my
park in this
concern.
place. I don't believe they do that. But if they would ever come across somebody that was using a placard that it was not issued to them, that would give us the authority to issue them a citation. I don't think it happens a lot. And I think some people do it unknowingly. Maybe they get in their grandparents' car and it's hanging there and they think they can park there. But if somebody was found to have done that, that would be a violation.
Can
And you can't
we be mean to them if they do that?
what?
Can we just be mean to them if they do that?
I don't think our parking service would do that, but.
Well, in an oversight, we talked about how these changes could be an opportunity for us to educate the community about these nuances, as well as the increased fine amounts.
Press releases out.
Cool.
No counterfeit placards or plate. I know one time it seems like I think it's written on, it was brought to my attention, it's been a while, but I believe our Perkins Surface officers had discovered somebody that had made an alteration on one. So that would be a violation. They can be, and they are now, it's subject to immediate tow, and can be towed, and that it would allow that you have to pay for all those costs, which are quite a bit. If you get your car towed, it can be $150. And then the fine will be $500. Currently, ours is $100. If you're paid after 5 days, it's $150. But we would mirror state law on this, and it would be $500. Also, the statute allows, and we would also do the same thing, 80% of the funds collected from the parking fine would go into the general fund, 20% would be sent to the Department of Public Safety. And we already have a similar thing. We had to collect cleat fees for the state. At the end of every month, the court clerk's office forwards that money to the appropriate agency, and it would be the same type of thing.
Councilor Patron?
It's my understanding, listening to these presentations in the past, that a 20% was to go to progressive independence on this.
We have never, in the city of Norman, divided up the 80%, 20%, because we've never had that in our ordinance, and we're going to put that in the ordinance this time. The state statute allows the municipality to keep 80%, and 20% goes to the Department of Public Safety for the enforcement of the parking provisions, where like the parking service officers can call and find out if it's a valid.
Right. I think it wasn't clear that the 80% of the city's money. So of our 80%, that 20% of that was to go to progressive independence.
I did not read that in the statute that way.
Not for the Oklahoma statute, that we had spoken as a city that we were going to mirror the law and put 20% of our 80% to go to progressive independence because they were.
We've never done that. I mean, it's the ordinance now has always been $100, and it's, as in all fines and costs, it's deposited into the general fund and then appropriated as council sees fit.
Okay.
I can go back and look at my notes from the oversight meeting, but I don't recall that distinction being made.
This was done 3 years ago, not just lately.
Phew, I was losing my mind there for a
Okay,
minute.
there you go. It was a lot farther back than just lately. This has been proposed a lot long before this time. So you may have forgotten some things and not been dropped. And I'm just wondering how you're going to collect those fines. Your police officers can't get there in time to regulate that.
All right. Just to clarify, our conferences are an opportunity for the council to ask questions and get clarifications on things. I'm sure staff is happy to stick around and answer questions for anyone else. So, but do you recall, Jeannie, this conversation from 3 years ago?
I think from my information, we we raised it to $100 in 2004, and we've not had a change, and all fines and costs from municipal court are deposited into the general fund, and then they're distributed or appropriated as council determines. We've never had a 20% in the ordinance to go to any other entity, or it'd be kind of like an earmark. We have, as far as I know, none of our municipal court fines and costs are earmarked for any specific agency or any specific fund.
Well, I'd be interested in looking into earmarking. If we're going to be able to have this big of a, I mean, that is a huge increase from 100 to 500. And I think that the work that they're doing in this particular ADA compliance, if you will, it directly needs to go, and we need to be supporting what they're doing to bring the rest of the city up.
Councilmember Wilson.
Do we currently provide funding to Progressive Independence in any capacity? No. And Progressive Independence is a nonprofit, am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
So if we were to use city funds to support their services, it would be like our social and voluntary funds that we use, and we do contracts with different social service agencies. It would probably be similar to that, where it could come forward as a contract. We can't just give them funds from the city without some sort of agreement on how that would be used.
Okay, I have an additional question that goes with that. And forgive me for Jeff for my lack of education, but what does Progressive Independence, what would they do? And maybe this is something we could talk about offline, or Jeff or you and I could get together. I'd be not concerned. I would want to know where that money was going, but I would think that that would be something we could do directive of in the budget, not necessarily this ordinance, right?
Well, with the CDBG grants, and there's a call right now to apply for funds from the city, that they would certainly qualify for that. is
That
my
is the
understanding.
social and voluntary services
Yeah.
funding.
Okay, so there's a public call right now that says, hey, any
Application.
organizations can apply for this now.
And we have a citizen appointed committee that looks at all of those and then we'll make recommendations.
Okay, cool.
Can I
Thank
ask
you
what
for the
our
clarification.
typical, what do we bring in every year under, like, what is
That
it?
was, I actually asked that question earlier today. Do we have those numbers? Yeah, thank you, Jeannie.
On, what do we bring in now?
How many tickets
Yeah.
are we writing right now?
And how
And
much?
I put that in the memo. In 2017, we had 70 citations for parking in a handicap space that paid the $100. 12 motorists paid $150, which means they paid it 5 days late. Then we had a various, and it's on page 2 in the memo. There were 17 dismissed with cost, 17 without cost, and 54 pending, which means they've never come in and paid, and no parking ticket goes to warrant. So it would just be sitting there. If that person ended up getting a speeding ticket or something, and it would be pulled, and they'd have to pay that parking ticket then. And in 2018, it went up to, the ones that actually were paid was 96. And then this year to date, which was a month or two ago, was 15. If like in 17, if we had 82 paid $500 each with our 80%, it'd be 32,800. It could bring in quite a bit of funds if it was collected.
Councilmember Wilson?
What what are the reasons why we dismiss without costs?
If somebody has a first offense and they've got a placard and they come in, but they just didn't have it displayed, and they come in, they go, I didn't have it displayed. Or sometimes people may come in and it's expired, and we give them an opportunity to get their reapply with, get their physician's document that they have to do. And then the cost, yeah, that's what, if they were dismissed without cost or for the first offense. If they're dismissed with cost, it's due to an expired one, but then we don't have them pay this full citation when they get it renewed. Because that does get by, and it can expire and you're not aware of it, or you don't have it in your car, you used another vehicle you're not normally driving. We want to give people that opportunity.
So far with 15, that'd be $1,500 that we've collected. And if it was 500, I went to law school, not math school, but I think that's 7,500.
But 80% would be 6,000.
Councilmember Bierman?
Can someone walk me through what the process is if someone calls in someone parked in a handicap spot? Because I've been tagged in a few posts over the last few months of someone who was a serial offender at one particular Sonic in this city. And it continues to make this person angrier and angrier every single time they go to Sonic and see someone parked in a handicap spot. So what's the process if someone calls this in? Is it just parking enforcement that has to drop whatever it is they're doing and go wherever it is that this issue?
We do a lot of
Happens.
headquarter calls, and Major Tysher may be able to explain
Yes,
this a little.
What we do is that call usually comes through dispatch as a non-emergency number. That if parking service is actually working, and they're dispatched there. We have 5 parking service officers, 4 full-time and 1 part-time. So if they're available, we send them. If it's after hours or there's not any of those working, then we send a police officer. If one is available, obviously it goes by priority of calls. But that's the way we would dispatch out. So either a parking service officer or a police officer will respond to the call. Sometimes, depending upon how long time it is to wait, they've moved. But a lot of times, obviously, we do write some tickets.
And it's helpful because our parking service officers note on the citation if they put HQ or something like that, and it says headquarters call, so I can explain to somebody, look, this was a complaint. They weren't just driving your neighborhood looking for you.
Just one follow-up before you go. So my concern with this is that it does sometimes take a while for someone to get out there. And I think what is most frustrating for the people who have reached out to me is that they have photos. They have pictures of this person parked in a handicap spot. It's easy to verify whether or not that driver's license or that tag on that car is linked to any particular handicap permit. Is that not how it works?
That's true, no, because I could be driving your car and I could have the handicap decal, and you can't prove who's driving the car. That's part of the problem with this. It's a violation to the vehicle, not a violation to the person. So even if that vehicle is stopped later, it's hard to say who was driving at the time. So you write the ticket to the car, not to the individual.
Okay. And I'd like to see if there are any kind of best practices that other cities do to kind of make that easier, because this is Whereas I prefer to park as close to the building as possible, but if I have to park 4 rows away, I just kind of grumble on my way into the building. But if you have a physical disability or any disability that keeps you from being able to walk a distance, not being able to park closely enough or not having a handicap spot or an accessible spot that has the space next to it for wheelchair entry and exit, that is hugely disruptive to that person's life. And so if we don't have the ability to get out there and respond quickly, I would hope that we would be able to possibly look at other ways to enforce it or to respond, because it's not as big of an issue for me to have to park far away. But if someone who is limited to the use of an accessible spot doesn't have access to one, that is incredibly disruptive to them. And so I'd like to figure out if there's a way to make that response time a little bit faster. Grace Rita.
No,
Councilman Wilson?
I'll go ahead and kind of piggyback on that. And it would be, it'd be cool if there's a way we could use photos as a citation.
They always take photos.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that, like, if a citizen could photo and send it into the police department. I get what you're saying, though, that you don't know who's been driving, but I almost want to put that burden on the person that owns that car to thump whoever's been driving their car and putting it in a handicap spot. I mean, like, if you drive my car and the tag is out, you get a ticket. Like, you drive my car and you don't have a handicap placard, then you should get a ticket. Even if I think the burden of proof should be on the person driving the vehicle.
So just so I'm clear,
Councilmember Patron?
I'm sorry. So just so that I'm clear, the process would be that Progressive Independence needs to utilize the open call on contracts, and perhaps in that contract that they would propose that they would be taking the 20% of the increase, our 80% share, in exchange for the services that they are providing to the community.
They typically come in as a request for a particular amount. In this case, identifying the 20% I think is difficult because we don't know how many are going to be written and how many are going to pay the full amount. But typically the proposals come in for a particular amount, and here's the program we're going to use that money for. And then the Social Voluntary Services Commission looks at those and makes a recommendation to council.
Could they be paid in arrears, like quarterly, when we know what we've been able to capture?
Possible. I think contract with the city, we'd have to be careful going beyond the fiscal year. So paying in arrears might be a problem that last quarter.
Okay,
But that's something we can look at.
great, thank you.
Your hand up.
And I did look around. Stillwater does assess $500. Enid is $200, and Edmond does $150 to $250. Just as a little comparison. Another amendments we're going to make in sections 20, 202, 802, 803, and 813. We needed to also include pay stations along the parking meters, because now we have pay stations. And in section 20-803D, we're going to add that allow motorists with a disability and displaying a state-issued placard or plate to park free of charge in a metered parking space but they have to adhere to the applicable time limits. And we have been doing that as a policy for quite some time. We're just wanting to get it codified in our ordinance. So if you've got a placard or a plate, you can park in a metered space, not have to pay the meter. But if it's a 2-hour meter, then you've got a 2-hour time limit. If there's no time limit on it, then you don't have a time limit. And I also just kind of wanted to show, I talked to our traffic engineers. There's over about 100-ish signs that will need to be changed. And they're proposing somehow something similar to add. We thought it would be pretty impactful. If somebody pulls up and that sign says that's a $500 fine, that may be more impactful. And it will tell the motorist, hey, it's a $500 fine. Mm-hmm. And so this is just an idea. I don't know if this is how they'll end up, but we do want to add something on the signs so everybody will know.
How much are those signs per sign?
$20.
And how many signs?
I think they told me 116, something like that, and hope to have that done in the next few once we get this to council, get it past first and second reading, and they'll get it working to maybe 2 or 3 months, be able to get the signs replaced. I don't know if they'll have them all replaced by that time, but that's what they'll work towards.
Any other questions? Okay, so sounds like we're all in support of increasing these fines, and I appreciate the notification with the new signs themselves. But as I said, I'd really like to work with our communications director to make sure we're letting the world know that we take this very seriously. We're not going to put up with it in Norman, and you will be fined $500. All right, with that, we'll move on to item number 2. Discussion regarding the renewal of existing sales tax currently dedicated to Cleveland County. I, during the budget process, had asked, when is that going to end? I remember with the Norman Forward debate, part of it was, oh, don't worry, that will end soon. But it looks like soon is here. So we're going to have a variety of speakers to talk about a couple of areas. This is our first time having a discussion on this topic. I have spoken to all of you about this, except Mr. Scanlon, actually. I think I haven't had a chance to sit down with you. Councilman Patrone and I chatted briefly last night. I think it would be helpful if bond counsel, not to put you on the spot, would tell us a little bit about what's currently there and when it expires, and your recommendation for how we approach that.
The proposition that was voted provided for a term for that sales tax, but also that would terminate when the indebtedness was paid, if that was sooner than the 20-year term. It's a good news story in that we've been able to pay 20-year bonds off in about 11 years.
It's definitely worth commending the county for good financial management of those dollars. So well done.
They've done a good job with it. Also, we've got a great county who it generates. We're fortunate to generate the dollars to get that paid off. So that will terminate on March of 2020. That will be the final payment on the bonds. So the thought was that I knew from past conversations with the county that they had some designs on what they need to do with a portion of it. Now, when we voted that sales tax for the jail, we did not provide for any continuing operation and maintenance money. And the primary reason for that is nobody was really sure what it was going to cost to operate and maintain that jail. We have a handle on it now, and the thought was always when that paid off, the county would look at things and come back to the citizens to request some operation and maintenance money. So they're in a position to do that now. The amount that was voted was a full quarter cent. It's thought that the county would like to come back and request a perpetual 1/8 of a cent, which was just half of that amount. And I think from what I understand, the thought is a portion of that will be used for operation and maintenance. A portion of that will be used to improve the juvenile detention facility, which is in bad need of upgrading. And a portion of it, as it stands right now, to provide grants to rural fire departments throughout the county to help them upgrade their equipment. That would leave, and the thought was that perhaps the city at the same time could request the additional 1/8 cent for city purposes to be determined by the city council. So that's kind of where we are right now. We thought that perhaps, and it may be a little bit of a rush, but the way sales taxes work, you can neither start nor stop a tax within the middle of a quarter. So they go by quarters, 1st of January, 1st of March, and so on. So we were looking at, and the county is in the same state of mind, to try to vote this in November so we could make it effective when the 1/4 cent tax terminates, and just carry on. Absolutely no tax increase. It will be just redirecting that quarter that's already outstanding. So that's where we are right now.
And why would you recommend November over a later date?
Number one, it gives us time to get everything in order if it's approved. If it's defeated, then we're going to have to regroup and I think rethink and decide what we need to do. Also, 2020 is an election year, so there are going to be a lot of things out there that people are going to be thinking about and considering, not the least of which is a presidential year. So that's the thought. November seemed to be the best time. We have special election dates that are available. And November 10th is one of those dates. We're not, the election board does not allow us to have elections in December. Oklahoma City and Tulsa can do that, but they're the only two cities in the state that can. So
Why is that?
What is that?
legislation,
Size of the
lobbying.
It's in the legislature, side of the city.
Okay.
So that's it. Their lobbyists are better than our lobbyists.
We'll have to get to work on that. Councilmember Scott.
Doesn't the county predominantly receive property taxes?
I'm sorry.
Doesn't the county generally predominantly receive property taxes to fund their expenses?
They do. They do. They receive ad valorem tax payments. The thought on that is, and unfortunately, we do most of the jails in the state, and most of those are financed through sales taxes. I don't know that there's a jail in the state financed with property taxes since 1965, and the last one was the old Cleveland County Jail. Since that time, financing and operation and maintenance has been done with sales tax. And one reason being, most of the customers at the jail are not necessarily property owners within the county. So they don't like to put the financing of that or the maintenance of the jail facilities on the back of the ad valorem property owners. So everybody that comes through the city, everybody that shops in the area shares the burden of providing that. So it just seems to be the most favorable way of operating and maintaining jails.
Councilmember Scott.
If the reinstatement or redirection of the 8-cent sales tax should fail on the county level, how would you fund the financing and operations of the jail?
Well, I don't know. Of course, that's up to the commissioners.
So they would most likely have to, just a follow-up, they would most likely have to allocate the ad valorem taxes?
Probably, yeah.
And what would that take away from? Roads and schools, or?
He's just bond counsel. I don't know if he can.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were like representing
No, he's
the
not.
county or something.
Well, I mean, he is for the bond part, but not.
That's a decision that the commissioners have to make just like you do when you're fixing your budget. So they will, when they have to reallocate funds, they cut departments, they move money around. And they go through the same process you all do, same process.
I think it's definitely worth mentioning that Oklahoma is the only state in the union that ties cities' hands to sales tax the way that we do. Our general fund is 67% sales tax. And I know some people are concerned that we pay for basic government services with sales tax, but by the constitution of this great state, that's what we have to do. So I'm very excited to have an opportunity to reclaim that 1/8% to address some major community and infrastructure needs through public transportation. I think I've shared with you all my vision for that. I've invited, well, they're always here. I didn't invite them. But to speak tonight, Mr. Francisco will speak about hopefully how much we project it will bring in. And then I've asked Mr. O'Leary to give us an update on the CART negotiations and those possible expenses. So once we get those, we can go a little bit more into detail. Thank you very much, Mr. O'Leary. Anthony?
So just quick and dirty calculations based on what we are currently bringing in from the public safety sales tax or from the normal forward sales tax. And that's a 1/2%. So 1/2 of that will bring in about $2.4 million, $2.5 million per year. And that's a pretty realistic or conservative estimate. I don't think that's going to be off by more than 2 or 3%. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. O'Leary?
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. As you said, an update on our CART or our public transit process. The good news is we are the grant recipient officially on July 1st, as we had hoped to be. So we are technically going to receive the federal money that the university has been receiving for about 30 years. But we are in process of a transitional kind of a startup of the process of the city actually running the bus transit system. So give you some numbers that are pretty fresh off the negotiation process with Embark. As you know, we are negotiating with Embark, which is the transit provider in Oklahoma City, to come to Norman and run the daily operations of the transit system. So as of yesterday, we are negotiating a contract, and we're bringing that back to you in 2 weeks from tonight on your next agenda. That has to happen because we are officially charged with beginning the operation of the fixed route system on August 2nd, and you don't meet again until August 13th. So we have to get this final agreement ultimately negotiated and in your hands for consideration 2 weeks from tonight. So these are the numbers.
Well, you may recall that last meeting, we voted for that 1-month contract with OU to fill that gap.
Thank you. So that's a great reminder so for the next 30 days, the university has agreed to be the sort of the gap provider for all of the systems. I think of it in 2 ways. I learned a lot about transit that I never really knew until this year. But transit in a local community like Norman is really divided up into 2 different pieces. Fixed route, these are the buses, the large buses you see on Main Street and Lindsay and so on. And then there is the paratransit, which is the curb or door-to-door service. You call in, you've got a doctor's appointment, they come pick you up at 10 o'clock, take you to your doctor, pick you up there, bring you home. Paratransit is very, very expensive, as you might imagine. Fixed route is less expensive. But the system that we are inheriting and committing to running without a break in service is both of those things, just for the sake of discussion. So the current estimate from Embark, which will be our provider for the fixed route and the paratransit services, they will literally be driving the buses, as they say. And then the city, one of the things we probably haven't shared with you in the last couple of weeks, this is about a 2 or 3 week ago realization, is Embark has chosen not to do the maintenance on the fleet. So we are inheriting a new fleet of vehicles and the city fleet maintenance operation, which is one of our public works operations. We are scrambling right now to try to figure out how we're going to do that. I'll speak to that here in a minute. Someone had to do it. Embark has chosen not to do it. University doesn't want to do it anymore. We have to maintain the buses on a day-to-day basis in order to keep the system running. So this is going to be Embark doing the fixed route and paratransit, and the city maintaining the fleet every day with additional mechanics and so on and so forth.
Councilmember Bierman.
Maybe you're getting to that. Maybe I'm jumping the gun here. But on June 4th, we talked about the estimated cost of service being $3.1 million.
Mm-hmm.
That does not look like 3.1.
Yes, ma'am, you're correct. And we didn't know. This is a moving target. We were, again, in the early stages of negotiation with both the university. We are leasing their facility for a certain rate. We're negotiating with Embark. Embark was in the early stages at that point of trying to figure out how many drivers to hire at what rate and how much insurance to pay and all those things. So we are now at the stage where they've done all of that, and it is no longer 3.1 million. It's now going to be the upper end, we think, is $3.8 million a year to run the current system with the current level of service. We're estimating high, as Embark is. Good for them, because we don't know exactly how this is going to play out. This first year is going to be a real interesting exercise for us, and by the end of this fiscal year, we will know a lot more. They will know a lot more, and I hope that we can bring those costs down by having fewer drivers and less fuel and less maintenance and so on. But I'll show you another perspective here in a minute as well. This is a very expensive operation. It will never generate enough revenue, not even close to doing this. In fact, I had a conversation with our Embark partners yesterday. The city of Oklahoma City subsidizes the system in Oklahoma City 60%. The current estimate here is 45% in Norman. So we're actually on the low end of city subsidization of a transit system. I suspect it's going to grow.
I'll clarify that while this is not a moneymaker, I don't think any of us thought it was, but I hope we all agree this is a basic service that governments provide that create places people want to live and get to medical appointments and to jobs. Councilmember Holman.
I just say, I add to that I don't know necessarily about other countries, but there's not a public transit system in the United States that makes a profit. Not New York City, not Los Angeles, not Chicago. And those are mega cities, and they still don't make a profit. But it is in my opinion, a vital service those governments provide because the citizens need it.
Councilmember Wilson.
I would like to add to both of those statements and say that I also want to play the infrastructure long game and be prepared for a regional transit in our future. So I don't want to have to rebuild our bus system from the ground up. So I think maintaining, however we can, is going to be important. And I do think that eventually the regional transit will make it all worthwhile.
It's an excellent point, Councilmember Wilson. When it does get funded by a sales tax initiative, as it's currently written, they're going to provide a basic shelter. That's it. They're not, for our residents to fully utilize this amazing connectivity in the metro area, we're going to have to fill in the gaps. And this is an excellent time to be looking at opportunity to do so. Councilmember Scott.
Question. Hopefully somebody can help answer. The state just created a new subdivision, I guess, within the DOT for the Office of Mobility. And I'm wondering, since that's funded by income taxes, if that would also be an option for the RTA and this sort of public transit thing, because it's supposed to fall under the Office of Mobility and Transportation.
I can't speak to funding. I know part of the mission of that great bill, actually was proposed by our local senator, was designed, as I understand, to bring together all the transit systems in Oklahoma under one umbrella, as opposed to each of them being independently run and really not connected. So that's one of the missions. The other mission is to get more funding, preferably state funding for transit. I think that's the next step. I don't think that's happened yet. But we certainly would support both of those things, and we want to be part of that initiative.
Yeah. Councilmember Patron.
I should have asked this earlier, but did you say whether or not the county's 1/8%, is that permanent as well, or is it sunsetting again like the current quarter that they're under?
No, the county sales tax absolutely sunsets. So they will also propose that 1/8 of a cent be renewed permanently and redirected for the purposes that they had in mind.
Okay, so their new one is permanent as well?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor, if I may, so again, to Councilmember Behrman's point, it's an important point. Put things in perspective here a little bit. A year ago, the city paid the University of Oklahoma $635,000 as our share of the public transit system. When we learned that we were inheriting that system, the council, based upon our best estimates a few months ago, added $500,000 to that budget, and you adopted in your 2020 budget, which became effective July 1st, $1,135,500. That's our current local city share to the budget. That'll be matched with $2 million in federal funds, which was why it was so important to get that grant recipient status on July 1st. But right now, we're projecting that local share to be, in worst case scenario, 1.8 million. So we are already, if our projections are right, we're already going to be short $664,000 in this fiscal year to operate the system as it is. I know council has expressed interest in growing it and putting Saturday service. All of those things will just cost more if we do that. So,
Councilmember Bierman.
Does this obviously does not include any projected or potential revenue from this? I mean, obviously, we're not going to be meeting this cost in revenue, but we're not going to be making zero in revenue.
Right. We haven't finished all of that, but the revenue resources are pretty limited. So we are working through that. You'll have that in your next meeting, but it doesn't amount to very much, frankly. The fair revenues are limited. Advertising revenues are a little bit, but it just doesn't add up to very much.
Councilmember Wilson.
So on the revenue piece, has there been an analysis of the appropriateness of that revenue dollar amount? Like, can it go up?
Great question. One of the things that we're going to, again, encounter very quickly soon after we get the system running is that, you said it, one of the advantages to doing what we're doing is Embark now becomes a regional transit provider. You get on an Embark bus in Norman, it's the same bus as you would get on Oklahoma City. You can go between the two cities and so on. No longer two providers. That's a really good thing. And I think in the future, Embark probably wants to be the commuter rail operator as well, perhaps. And so we want to get to this regional transportation system. But that also means that we probably need to adopt the same policies and fare structures as Embark has in Oklahoma City. That makes sense to us, but they're higher than they are here in Norman. So for instance, a bus ride in Norman costs 75 cents. A bus ride in Oklahoma City costs $1.75, a fixed route. A paratransit trip, I don't have all the numbers, but it's about double in Oklahoma City what it is in Norman.
Would the ridership support that kind of an increase though?
It's a great question. It's something for council to decide. But I know Oklahoma City and COTPA and Embark just did a national analysis of fares, and their fares are considered low relative to other transit providers in the country, including the Midwest. So, you could adopt that principle and say that we've already done a fare analysis and we need to at least get up to the Embark rates. If we don't do the Embark rates, then we're in a position of creating a new fare structure in Norman, which I don't think Embark is going to support very much. They want to have the same fare boxes, the same fares, the same structure, the same policies, and so on throughout the system. We think that makes a lot of sense.
Can I ask an additional question that goes with that? Would then we maybe be really close to sharing routes across the city borderline or city limits?
Long distance between, that was one of the things we started to do early on, was to figure out if Embark could run this system out of Oklahoma City, out of their current maintenance facility, and it just is too far away to make that feasible, just from a standpoint.
But there can be connections between the two?
There are connections today. There's 6 buses that run between Norman and Oklahoma City every day. So that's already there.
Councilmember Scott.
Do we have a CART or Embark rep here today? Or is this just a
We did not
side?
invite them.
Is this
tonight.
kind of a side thing having to do more with the sales tax? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And we prepared for all the detailed questions here in a couple of weeks. More interesting, maybe bad news here. We're also inheriting a fleet of 27 vehicles, 7 large buses, 18 small. Average vehicle mileage is 200,000 miles for an average vehicle in this fleet that has to be replaced. So 22 of these that we're inheriting have reached that useful end of life. We're inheriting an old fleet, which means that we're going to be stuck replacing that fleet. A large bus, $550,000 each, and it has about a 12-year useful life. We currently have no budget for fleet replacement in this program, so we're inheriting that fleet. We're also inheriting the fleet replacement costs. We're going to recommend that you budget in the ongoing future $1 million a year just in replacement of the fleet, just for the transit. That doesn't include the rest of our fleet replacement needs.
Councilmember Holmes, do you still have a question?
Yes, the deficit that we're looking there, the 664,000, did that include what we think it's going to cost to the maintenance for all these vehicles?
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have said that. That is our best estimate of all three phases, so fixed route, paratransit, and maintenance. Yes, and we're doing that in-house in the most efficient way we can.
We probably don't have I don't know if these fit in the same bay as a dump truck or a fire truck.
No, sir, they don't. We have one bay in our current fleet operation that can accommodate this. So that's the next discussion we'll be needing to have is how do we get a facility built?
Where do we store 27 buses too, right?
Where do we store 27 buses? We've got some real challenges facing us here. We're doing our best just to get this system running. And the university is going to work with us on their site, but we're anxious to get out of their real estate and they're anxious to have us out of there. So this is a process. I should have mentioned the process right now, or what you'll consider next 2 weeks from now, is that we will begin if you approve the Embark contract, we'll begin the fixed route operation with Embark on August 2nd, and then paratransit by October 1st. And the university has agreed to bridge that distance for us as well with the paratransit. Embark just couldn't get up and running on both operations. Same is true with maintenance. We're going to continue the maintenance of the fleet at the OU facility. We're going to pay them a rate. Their mechanics are going to be doing the work, so we're going to be paying their mechanics. And then over the course of about 3 months, we hope to hire mechanics, hire folks who can do the work, get them trained at the OU facility. OU folks will train our folks. And then hopefully we have an alternative for a site or another building at North Bay so we can move the whole operation there, I'm hoping by the end of this calendar year.
Councilmember Wilson.
So the 22 vehicles that are at the end of their useful life, let's see, how do I want to structure this question? We are taking over this asset. Are we getting compensated for the depreciation that the university was able to take on those assets?
Essentially, yeah, they are. It's really the other way around. The university is having to pay back any useful value in the fleet that they acquired through federal funding. So they're paying back money to the federal government. We are now lobbying. In fact, we've had some progress today that any amount paid by the university, both for their building, that they use federal funds, and for their fleet, will actually come back to us. It's really, really important that we get that for these reasons. We are going to be in trouble here with our fleet and our building needs if we don't get a pretty good influx of
Let us know if we need to make some calls or.
It's going fine. Everyone's trying to work with us, but this is if you're wondering why the university didn't want to run the system, I'm telling you right here.
Yeah.
This was a very expensive thing to run. We just inherited a very expensive operation. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about additional tax funding. You're going to need it to run this system if you want to run a transit system going into the future. It's never going to get cheaper. And I wanted to finish just on a point, just to remind council that about a year ago, we partnered with Cleveland County on a joint parking strategic plan. And the outcome of that was the recommendation to establish a multi-jurisdictional parking authority. We weren't even thinking transit at that point. We were just thinking parking. But I think it's food for thought for you to think about parking and transit together. Most cities are doing it together. The reason they do that is because the parking revenues actually pay for the transit. That's how Oklahoma City pays their local share. That's how Dallas does it. That's how Kansas City does it. And so this concept of a parking authority with the county could still come back into play with this discussion of additional sales taxes. And eventually, what is today just another public works division in transit could become a trust authority for regional, for Norman parking and transit services. And that sales tax could be the basis for both running the transit system and perhaps improving our parking, building parking structures in Campus Corner and downtown and so on, like we've talked about. But without some additional funding, you're never going to get this one off the ground either. So I want to throw that out to you, that if you're considering a source for the 1/8 cent, parking and transit would be a great place to put that money, because we need it. We desperately need the money for the transit system now. That's happening as we speak.
Councilmember Scanlon.
In talking about this bus business with some friends of mine,
One person suggested and cited Shawnee as an example that to help operate their system, and this is not current, this goes back a few years, they actually got involved in some sponsorship of a tribe in that particular case. I don't know what the legalities are of such things, but it seems to me that if it were possible, that some kind of sponsorship, be it a tribe, be it an industry, it might help mitigate some of these costs.
So clearly we have an opportunity to take over our public transit and possibly look at parking. There's another opportunity that I want to bring to your attention, and my apologies, we don't have handouts, but I emailed it to you. Just kidding. You do? Okay.
And maybe they pursue that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Any nickel or dime.
Yeah, okay. So you may recall that a variety of community partners worked together to put together a strategic plan. I know.
ADA sidewalks?
Oh, is there one more slide?
ADA sidewalks?
Didn't know if you wanted to talk about sidewalks. We're here to do that if you would.
So I had, thank you for bringing that up. I had initially envisioned, as I spoke with all of you, sidewalks and bike trails. It looks like there may not be enough for the sidewalks and bike trails. One of my concerns with including them was how would we decide in what order they would be constructed and where? So I'm happy to answer that as well. If you'd like to go ahead and cover that slide, Mr. O'Leary, we can make sure we have all the information.
We just put together some basic information here, but I would just remind you all that we do have a comprehensive transportation plan that has a sidewalk master plan embedded. You adopted that in 2014. So we just Angela drew out one of the short range projects recommended in that was a $1.7 million sidewalk program. I didn't include it here, but we have it. There's a map of all the missing sidewalks around Norman, millions of dollars of needs in that. So if there was an interest in a sidewalk program, we're in a good position to do that. Not only have they been identified, but they've been prioritized. So we know kind of where the most sidewalks are needed and how much they're going to cost. It's expensive. You're going to get about a mile a year of legacy trail for $1 million. You're going to get about 2.5 miles of 4-foot sidewalk for $1 million. So again, these dollars are not going to go very far for a sidewalk program. The other thing I wanted to mention too is, and it sort of dovetails with the previous conversation, we have a very active city ADA program. No disrespect to Progressive Independence, they're a great organization, but we need money for the city's ADA program, and we are millions of dollars behind in that one as well. So about a $4.5 million a year, yeah, at least. But we projected in our recent ADA transition plan about $4.5 million a year in ADA needs for our parks, our sidewalks, our signals, our buildings. And so if you're looking to channel dollars into accessibility, I hope you'll consider the city's ADA program, which we are actively working on. We have a wonderful citizen committee. In fact, Progressive Independence sits on our citizen committee. And they're just beginning now this summer, kind of sort of figuring out where the highest needs are and how much we can get done with our current capital program. So just want to mention those two areas.
Councilmember Scott?
So with the changes with ACOG's ranking, do we have an update on that as a side question? And then also, if it's not that updated, would some of these sidewalk projects be funded through that if they were ranked or prioritized in
Great
that way?
question. So without getting too much far in the weeds, for those who followed the last year's process with our federal transportation funding, there was a change in the rating system. It turned out, frankly, to be not very, very, very unfavorable to the city of Norman, very favorable to the city of Oklahoma City. And in fact, we all agreed after the fact that it needed to be reevaluated. In the meantime, ACOG opted to allocate this year's or last year's funds the way they were rated. So Angela Lombardo, our transportation engineer, has been sitting on the committee to reevaluate the rating system. I think all of our comments have been received by the ACOG staff, and they're coming back.
There's a meeting scheduled middle of this month. to review the proposed changes. So we'll know more then.
I think we're consistent with most of the cities, including Oklahoma City, that it needs to be changed again. And one of the things they're doing is they're testing all of our applications for road projects with this new rating system. So we'll know here in a couple of weeks if we agree with it or if Edmund agrees with it or so on. I really feel optimistic that they're going to come together with a more appropriate plan, and we're going to be back on track next year with our federal transportation funding. But to your point, one of the big changes last year was the rating system strongly favored sidewalk projects for the first time ever. It was always a road and bridge program for all these years. And not that sidewalks are bad, but our bread and butter has been on the road program has been the ACOG funding. What happened, as you know, is the city of Oklahoma City was successful in getting 9 or 10 sidewalk projects for several $1 million, and not very many roads got built this year with that federal funding. We all agreed that was not the direction we wanted to go, and I think it'll get fixed this year. But if it doesn't, sidewalk projects are eligible for submittal along with road projects.
And follow up to that, we should know that because obviously I'm concerned still about Robinson.
Sure.
And, but if we can get more sidewalks built and be more compliant with our ADA plan and, comprehensive transportation in general, I'm also an advocate of that. So when will we know?
Appreciate that. So the track we think we're on is the technical committees are reviewing all this. It'll go to the policy committee that Mayor Clark and I think Mayor Pro Tem Holman sit on the ACOG policy committee. And so they will see it, I'm going to say August or September is what I think you're going to see it. So we'll know well ahead of what's coming. We will have done our staff review and we'll be making recommendations to council and these members as to how they should vote. Can't really say how Oklahoma City is going to vote or Edmond or Yukon or even those other agencies, but we think that the system will be good. If that happens and we're all in favor, the grant cycle begins again in December. We submit all of our grant applications, including the Robinson I-35 project, and usually we know around February or March whether our projects made the cut.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary. So, now that we have the handout, the Market Street Economic Development Strategic Plan, I help serve on the steering committee. And what you see in front of you is who is on that committee, as well as the 9 strategic initiatives that the plan would execute. Notice that number 8, infrastructure, is one of them. So it has been proposed that a percentage of what is drawn from that 8% would go towards executing this plan. So it would in no way be just a pile of money that people get to hand out for economic development. It would be executing the plan that has been in place and looking for a way to be executed, essentially. The city of Norman had 3 seats on this steering committee, and we would maintain 3 seats, and it would be the committee that would execute or decide which portion of the plan is executed at any given time. So essentially, I see this as an opportunity to look at the future of Norman in a variety of ways. Your top 3, I think, are pretty standard, but I'm really excited about 4 through 9. The Weather and Radar Cluster Consortium, Permitting and Development Services, number 5. We're currently already looking at auditing that process when I bring back the Business and Community Affairs Committee with Chair Council Member Wilson. That would fit nicely in with that. Activity centers and district development. I'm very excited to support our small businesses here in Norman, and I think this will allow us to reinvigorate districts all over the community. Quality of life projects are huge, infrastructure, obviously, and one that's near and dear to my heart, community inclusion engagement. And one of the things I like about the proposal is that it's a percentage of what we bring in, so we can avoid the pitfalls of public safety sales tax, where we have set amounts that we have to fund, and then we end up having to subsidize it if our sales tax revenue is low. So I believe the ideal amount would be approximately $500,000 to go into this from our 1/8%. We currently give $125,000 to our partnership with the Norman Economic Development Coalition, It's my understanding that if we have this designated fund to execute this plan and continue supporting, that would go away. So we would free up the 1.1 that we had allocated, which clearly is already not enough for the bus system, as well as another 125,000 out of the general fund to work towards the laundry list of other projects that we need to address in this community. Councilmember Scott.
Anthony, would you repeat what you said earlier exactly, or approximately how much the 8-cent sales tax that to come back to the city, how much that would generate?
1.8% would bring in about 2.5 million.
2.5 million, and we're wanting to put a bunch of money towards CART, and we're already looking at a deficit of about what this plan is asking for, a little bit over that, in fact. So what percentage, I guess, I'm not the math person either. What percentage of that would, I guess, come out to be 500,000? So what percentage of the 2 point whatever million?
500,000 is 20% of 2.5 million.
So 20% seems like a lot, especially when we're still looking at this deficit here of the $664 million for CART itself. And then we also are looking at the RTA, which has to be funded by a sales tax. If we can make space for that, I think that also is a kind of priority for economic development as well, is having accessible transportation. So I'm not sure how I feel about 20%. I feel like that's a lot.
Okay. Councilman Bierman.
I had a question, and then you actually helped me bring up another question. That 2.5 million, is that the total eighth, the other eighth? So it's 5 million total for the quarter?
No,
quarter
because
percent?
their 1/8 for the county gets the whole county. We only 1/8 gets Norman.
That was the crux of my question. So this 2.5 million.
The county is about 4.
Okay, so that's our 40% ish of that 1/8, because the city of Norman is approximately 40% of the county. I'm not a math person either. So, okay, so that answers that question. My second question is just because I have a feeling now that this has been brought up, there's going to be some questions about it. Remind me when we had a full discussion about, this is not the full report, obviously, it's 2 pages. So when did the council discuss the full report? So anyone who wants to go and find the discussion about it or refresh their memory about it, where can they find that?
I recall it was a presentation, a public one before a meeting. Everyone seemed to like the internship idea, but I'd have to flip through this. Do you all know off the
July 2018.
July of 2018?
Okay, great.
Before Mary came. We're just narrowing it down right and left here.
Because I know there are going to be some people who want to know. This is obviously, these are just the top lines, and so wanting some additional information about.
Can we have another presentation?
Before we get to the vote, if this is something that council feels like they want to proceed on, the 20% to economic development, I think we should have a more detailed conversation about what exactly we're going to be funding with it and dive deeper into the report.
Well, I completely agree. You know, I have concerns about just saying we're going to do this and have such broad topics, but it's my understanding that the strategic plan that has been drafted and is in place and ready to go, but has not been released yet, will be released. So it'll be fully transparent in what exactly we're going to do.
Okay, and that will be before we vote on this and before we put it to a public vote, because I think that's going to be critical information.
Yes, I think once we have our ballot language settled, so when we know that it's going to be included, we want everyone to know exactly what's going to happen.
Well, I personally would prefer that information be made ahead of time, because I'm going to want to gauge my constituents about whether or not that economic development piece should be in there. If we're going to be tying it to this plan, then I think we need to have the full plan and also a presentation about what is actually included in it. Because I don't know that I can support including something like this without
I completely
having some
agree.
feedback.
I can't speak for Team Norman. Do you know, can anyone answer when it would be released, or?
We'll bring it to the NABC board.
Okay.
And based on their opinion, before they see the presentation.
Is it possible for council to look at it first before it gets fully released?
Yes, I can bring that in front of our board. I'm not at liberty to make that decision.
Totally understand.
NABC board.
Okay, because I know Councilor Patron had that question. Councilor Patron.
So I guess mine was twofold, but the first part would be, did public dollars pay for the Market Street consultant and report that you're talking
I
about?
believe it was funded by NEDC.
It was funded by a variety of individuals in the community. So
So-
NEDC funded half of it, and the remaining half was funded by a variety of stakeholders in the community.
So it's subject to Open Records Act anyway.
I can't answer that.
We are not subject to open records. NEDC is not.
But public dollars paid for half of it, at least.
No.
No, just stakeholders, businesses, and the community.
Okay. And I guess my other question is what is the county throwing in on this?
Well, as we discussed last night, it'd be a Norman project, not a countywide one.
But, they are recipients. I mean, they sit on NEDC, right? Like they're partners on it. So has anybody
No.
talked to them?
No.
No?
No,
Okay, well, they have
that's the
representatives
steering
here.
committee for this plan.
Okay. I really know nothing about this Market Street thing, so
It's
it's
the
like,
first meeting, so we're just talking about it. A lot of people are on the same page that you are, so don't feel too.
okay,
involved.
so the county doesn't have anything to do with this at all?
Well, aside from being
Aside from being
County
sitting on the
seat.
steering committee?
I'm looking.
No, they're not on, there's no representation by the county on the NEDC board.
Okay.
They were a participant of the steering committee for the planning process, as you
Okay.
can see the list.
And also, Councilman Patron, on the fourth page of this document, I think I had mentioned to you what communities pay into economic development in a variety of ways. And Norman is towards the bottom of that amount. But
Right.
I told you about it, but I hadn't seen this, so there it is.
And that was, you were saying of the 125,000 a year or something,
Correct.
not other ways that we contribute to economic
Exactly. That's a
development.
very good point.
Okay.
Councilman
Well,
Scott.
Yes.
I'm
Are
sorry,
you
were you
good?
done?
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, it feels like Latin, so without actually seeing,
lot to be.
I'm actually decent at Latin. So
Uh,
maybe I'll take a different language that I don't know. If we can get that explanation, that would be really helpful to you.
Okay. Councilman Scott?
Okay, I had a couple questions, and I think I was mostly piggybacking off of Kate, because I think obviously these are fabulous. As a recent college grad, I want to see more quality jobs in Norman and ways to get to them. I'm just concerned about basically what all this means, and like under each bullet point, what we would want to see, especially when it comes to infrastructure, because when we're talking about funding infrastructure using a sales tax, which I'm not a big fan of sales tax as a principle because it's so regressive. But because of our hands being tied, I know we have to have it. And so to fund our public infrastructure, when it says infrastructure projects here, I've also seen some things from your share online that that citizens want stormwater funded.
Mhm.
So in those infrastructure projects, could we guarantee like whatever's here also goes to stormwater? If they do end up receiving a percentage of this 8-cent sales tax, because part of it is going to infrastructure projects.
I don't know about that, but I do know that if we free up $1,250,000 in the general fund, we can target some of that towards our stormwater projects.
How much is that?
Well, at least the 1.1 plus 125,000
1.1. Okay, so the 125,000 that they currently receive, right,
would go away.
would go away, but then they'd still be receiving the 20% from the 8-cent, which is going to actually give them 500,000, so almost $500,000.
Correct, but that means the 125,000 is free out of the general fund, which can be used for anything, not just what's designated for what we have allocate by the election. Councilman Patron.
Just a matter of process. When we go to vote on this, do we vote as to what's going to go into the package before the voters? Like, is this its own piece?
Brenda,
And
this sounds like a
each of
great
these
time for you to explain the
slides-
process for time deadlines and how it's going to go, regardless of what we decide to put forward.
Okay, if you are keyed in on a November election, you would have to have first reading of your ordinance that calls the election on the August 27th meeting, with second reading being on the September 10th meeting. Your notice to the election board is September 12th. You have to provide 60-day notice to the election board. What is included in ballot language is limited to 200 words or less, the ballot title. So what you include in that, has to be within those 200 words. So you wouldn't be able to list like all other projects. Now you can list in your ordinance that has the ballot proposal in it. And that's what we've done in the past with Norman Forward and PSST, you can list all the projects that you plan to do with that dedicated tax. But they wouldn't all be listed in the ballot title. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
But then we did in our transportation bond issue recently, where we didn't list every project in the actual proposition, but we gave the general purpose and then the ordinance set out those projects.
Right, but I guess my question was, I'm sorry, may I ask a question? When council actually votes, are we voting on as this being a particular piece of it and whether or not we want this to go to voters, and then the different pieces of the transportation bond, like, yeah, I like that idea or I don't like that idea to go? Or is it like, this is what we get and this is the pot and we're gonna decide whether we like it or not at 20% to go to?
Oh, so it's up to council what makes it on the ordinance, that calls the election. So, what would normally happen between now and then is you all would be meeting and discussing to see what's in your final ordinance.
Mhm.
And then when you vote on that ordinance, yes, you're voting on everything that's included in that ordinance. But
Okay.
what would be included would be your determination.
Okay, but we could do it like the animal oversight where we broke it down. The different things that
That's
would
a
be in
little
the
different. That
ordinance.
wasn't something that was going to the voters.
Right.
So whether or not we would have to talk more with legal about whether or not you had different ballot propositions where you vote on one and not the other, but if you don't, but they don't both pass, what do you have left?
Right.
So we can talk through that as you all talk through the process.
Councilmember Scott.
I'm almost done. Will our 8 cent, if we go forward with this by September, we have to basically have this figured out by September, how we'd like to do this and put it on the
Say by
ballot.
August 27th, we need to have a pretty firm
By
idea
August
of what
27th. Okay, so will in November, if this is the date, we have the county and the city sales tax, so it would be a 0.25%, but it would be two separate ballot items, is what I understand. Is there anything else that would be coming on the ballot at that time?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, the notice to the election board is not until September, so, I can check on that the closer we get, but, there's not any known election at this stage.
But we do know that there are other items we will take to an election at some point. The OG&E franchise agreement, it was my understanding they were hoping for November, but will not share that with us. And then we know that there will be a water rate increase, which last we checked in will be next fall. So this is a nice base.
2020 fall.
Okay. May I ask a follow-up question? I think about the ballot language, kind of. So as far as we're gonna have more meetings about this and how we want to do the sales tax, because obviously we do. Well, I say as the city general fund wants to see more money, more sales tax revenue. I personally don't like sales tax, but we want to see more of that money. So I'm wondering, when we are going to have very explicit ways that we're dividing up this sales tax, and then we're going to put that on the ballot, like this much is going towards regional transportation or public transportation, and this much is going towards economic development in the form of job creation or internships, radar stuff. So that's my question, I guess, is like, we have to figure that out and decide, we have time to decide how we want to divide those things up.
I'll throw out the first proposal of a percentage, whatever amount we agree on goes towards executing the Market Street strategic plan, and the remainder goes towards parking and public transit. I don't think we have the flexibility for sidewalks, unfortunately. They're incredibly expensive. And bike trails, I've gotten a surprising amount of pushback on bike trails. I thought everyone liked bike trails. But that's where I'm at. I think it's simple. It's got to be simple if we're going to pass it. And luckily, when it comes to educating the public, there will be a plan that they will see how this will work. And everyone knows that cart got handed to us. And now as Mr. O'Leary continues the negotiations, we're going to know exactly how much that's going to cost us. Councilmember Holman.
One, I would note that we build bike lanes into new streets when we build them. So they're not standalone bike lanes that I think people are really confused about. Anyway, if we do nothing, is there anything preventing the county from just renewing the sales tax as it is and taking all of it? Exactly. So we need to figure out what we want to do, or we get none of it. Because the county is definitely going to be renewing it, whether we want to be involved or not. So that's happening. And we need to figure out what we want to do with it so we can recapture some of that sales tax.
I agree.
Because first, like to your original point, the county has property taxes. We are limited to just sales tax. And in my opinion, paying for the jail in the first place with sales tax was the county dipping into the city's only revenue source. So, you know, if it's now up for renewal, we need to get in on some of that, in my opinion. So we need to figure it out, and we need to do it quickly, because I don't think the county is going to wait for us.
I know they won't. And they're going for November, which means we need to get it together and go for November as well. Because my concern, if it's not packaged as a deal, that this is what will replace this, it screws it up from the beginning. Councilmember Wilson.
I just wanted to say that while I love personally sidewalks and bike paths, my ward does not generally. So I'm happy to remove those from the.
Okay. Councilmember Bierman.
I'm totally sold on transit, bike lanes or sidewalks. Additionally, for them being expensive, they have a higher vote threshold, and that concerns me. I still don't know that I'm sold on the economic development piece. That's the part that concerns me the most. And frankly, I think that that's the part the public is going to have a lot of concern with, unless we're able to get some very good information out there very quickly. I'd be totally fine with putting the whole thing towards transit.
Well,
I absolutely would.
I'm glad that you're open to having this conversation, because when you see projects like MAPS and Norman Ford, they build coalitions of voters. I think we have a block of voters that could care less about public transit as much as they think it's fine. They don't use it and don't see the need for it. Then you have a group of voters that could care less about job creation and placemaking because they're just trying to pay their bills. So I think by creating a coalition, we have a better chance of passing this as quickly as we do. And to be honest, I'm ready to believe in the future of Norman, and this has a plan in place to make that happen. I personally worked on this plan. I'm fine with negotiating the amount and the percentage, because I do think that is up to us. But we have an opportunity to invest in public transit and to invest in job growth, placemaking, redoing our centers and district development, this whole laundry list of things with no sales tax increase. This is an unprecedented opportunity that we have got to take advantage of for multiple reasons. We will continue these discussions, though, because it is very important to be transparent, and I want to know it. I want everybody to know where their money is going. Councilmember Carter.
Oh, sorry to be late. So if economic development is part of this package, I'm going to oppose it, because the last economic development thing was the TIF, and all we did is take my tax money and subsidize Petco, which cut my dog food sales by $3,000 a month. It's exactly what happened. And as far as I see, economic development is nothing more than subsidizing businesses to come in here and compete against me. And I'm a guy that grew up here. I didn't get an incentive to start my business. I got 50 employees. We got a $2 million payroll. And I don't get an incentive to do anything. So I have zero faith in the Market Street study. Was flawed. It was horrible, in my opinion. I thought it was outright lying. That's part of the whole arena justification was the Market Street study. So if we're going to go there, it's a non-starter for me.
Yeah.
I'm good. Sorry.
Any other questions, things we need to be aware of, bond counsel, things like that as we begin these discussions? Okay, well, Council, I appreciate you're willing to discuss creative ways of, again, how we can invest in the future of our city. All right.